This one is a little bit more avant-garde, I would say. Let's talk to me about this one. I see it's a similar mounting setup. You've got
Yeah.
the standoffs with the plexiglass, but what was your media in this one, Charlotte, as I set you up?
Um, this one is created with my menstrual blood
Okay.
and resin, actually.
Oh, I
Um,
can see that. I
yeah,
can
I
see
had to
that
mix
there.
it with resin. I tried it on paper, but
Mm-hmm.
it gets really crackly and gross, and it turns more brown, and I wanted to try to retain some of that red. So I did some
Yeah.
research. I had worked with resin before and looked at other artists that had used blood and resin, and I was like, oh, this is going to work. So it was an exciting process.
I think it's interesting in a way of kind of demystifying and destigmatizing like the use of this medium to just get into the nitty gritty of like the chemical properties and you just trying to get a certain look out of it, as if it was any other media. Oh, I couldn't just use it straight away. I had to use resin. I had to not just put it on paper because then it would oxidize too much and it would get brown and it was not the hue you were looking for. I think just in doing that kind of demystifies it, and it takes some of the like, I don't know, the ickiness that some people might feel, just by analyzing it as if you were talking about like a paint, because you do really get a great color out of it.
Mm-hmm. And I love the crackle. Uh,
Yeah.
I've got my own reasoning and meaning and everything behind it, but art just kind of needs to, speak for itself too.
Mm-hmm.
So the crackling to me is not part of my story per se, but I can see that someone else could look at it and create their own connection with, uh, you know, climate change or whatever story they experience from it. So the
Mm-hmm.
crackling was just, and it kind of brings you in and makes you, I don't know, want to explore more, I hope.
It
Instead
gives
of
it
just
it gives it great detail. I mean, I don't know if it would have been possible, but I could have seen this as just a wash, like like a flat color. But the texture you get out of it is fantastic. That's a result of the resin? Because it's not just crackling, right? We have that here. I don't know if can you see my cursor?
yeah, I
Okay,
can.
cool. So I can use it to kind of point. But here is the you have like a bubbling effect. It almost looks like a resist in some places. Is that the resin that's causing that?
That's the resin. Yep,
Okay.
that's and the blood might it separates. So there's whatever. There's kind of a plasma, there's a red, and so I think that's what's happening too. And actually this a lot of the things I do are sort of experiments and surprise. And I did some tests before I actually created this one. And when you first mix it, it creates these, when it's still wet, really like lots of little circles, sort of like cells in a body. And I
Is,
loved that. I was like, oh, this is amazing.
is
And then
like a
it
good example
dried
here.
and crackled. And I was a little bit disappointed that it lost the cellular feeling.
Yeah.
But then it really dried, and then I made it into a map, and I loved it. I was like, this is just really, um, I don't know. And there's so many cool images of our world, satellite imagery, and it's kind of reminiscent of that for me. And it just visually, it's interesting. I hope people can see that instead of getting grossed out.
Yeah, I
And
think yeah, you give people the opportunity to not get hung up on what it is made of and appreciate the pure the aesthetic nature of it. And you're like you're saying, you do get there is some really interesting the texture. This reminds me almost of like streets, or you're looking at the world from far away and you see
right,
the little lights. This is like how cities appear in
right,
clusters when you're looking
yeah.
at the world from outer space.
That's why I was so excited about it crackling,
Right.
because when it was cellular, it felt so organic, and it felt almost like inside. And I love to think of humanity and people as I'm working, and so
Hmm.
that we're these little cells and we kind of create our universe. I loved that idea, but then when it crackled and you could see it from far away, and I'm really obsessed with that satellite imagery that are just really cool. It's a great website for it, but anyway, so then everything changes. This is just how art, and you embrace it or you don't. And I tend to kind of, enjoy it. If it's not working, I'm not going to move forward with it. But
so my one big question for this piece was, and we had discussed this via email a little bit, was or I'd floated this via email, was the catch-22 of working with a media like this. And the idea that I was floating was, you can use something like Menstrual Blood and feel like you are being really avant-garde and you're really going to hit people in the gut with a concept, and it's going to be very, very overt as to what you're trying to talk about, and this issue of shaming people for their periods, and also how you were kind of coming up upon this moment in your daughter's lives where they're going through puberty, and you're going to start having these conversations about what it means to kind of grow up and become an adult, and all of these biological changes. So that's the one side of it, and then from the viewer's side, they can either feel that way, feel like, oh wow, this is really like a bold thing to do, or I think the other side, and what makes this kind of a catch-22, is some people can look at this and kind of write it off as sort of the cliche feminist artist approach to, like, of course that's what she's going to paint with, and then just kind of miss all of these great little details that we were talking about that exist separate and apart from your choice. I mean, it's not apart from the choice of media, but it's separate from the message, right? There's a lot to appreciate here, even if you don't want to get on board for the other part of it, which you have to realize that, like, whoever's going to look at your art they're going to come from a variety of viewpoints. So it would be unfortunate for them to just get hung up on the media and not get to appreciate all these little details that we were just talking about. So I know that's more of that's kind of like an aqueous question, but if you could just talk a little bit about the kind of two sides of the sword there.
And I think it's a really interesting idea, and I didn't, if I'm being completely transparent, I didn't even think about it. I mean, a little bit. I knew people would be grossed out. I mean, my poor family had to see me making this at the table. And I would cover it up with like cardboard, and so they didn't have to see it, but they're like, mommy, that's gross. And I was like, but it's not gross, And I mean, it was at first, but it's anyway. And so what I want to respond to that is my experience of how this piece came to be. And it's, well, first of all, I started using a menstrual cup, which I think that everybody should use because it's better for our planet and could maybe help with this period issues and girls not being able to go to school and in places in Africa and that kind of thing. But anyway.
Because of waste, because it produces less or zero waste, essentially less waste.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
There's no disposable media that you have to, okay.
Exactly. You are reusing this for, 8-10 years, same thing. I didn't even know about them till, I don't know, less than 10 years ago. And I was like, how have I not been using this? So it was definitely to educate the public about menstrual cups.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I want to be like too, I was really, so about 5 years ago, I was really attracted to the beauty of blood in water and the patterns that it makes. And I was like, I should photograph this. And then, when you're like, what do you, no, I mean, this voice kept saying, oh, that's disgusting. And then I was like, I should make a map out of it because it's really beautiful. And then it's like, no, that's disgusting. And after 5 years, every single month of, this voice kind of telling you should make art out of it, eventually you just have to do it so that you can shut that voice up And that's what I did. I was like, it's time. I had played with resin before, which was new to me. And so I felt comfortable with using it and how to do it. So I was like, I'm just going to make it, and just so it's done and it can sit under the bed or in my studio or whatever. And so it was a lot more of just kind of when ideas come to you, and if you don't do something with it, it's just going to get stuck, and then there's no room for, I mean, I have plenty of room for other ideas, but still just, you just got to get, so that, and then it just so happened that, and it may have been that actually when I created it 5 years later, was because, like you said, my daughters are about to enter puberty. We're talking about periods. They're doing growing and changing at school. And I'm completely open about all of it. And I appreciate that, that we can talk openly about it, and there is no shame. And actually, I think they're excited about it, which is great, instead of scared. And so I think that's probably why this eventually came to be, because it was kind of a topic of conversation. And then, a call for entry came out called Elements, and I thought, well, this is kind of the description, it just fit it perfectly, and it got accepted into the show, and then it was out in the world. And so, getting back to your question of, not wanting to kind of turn people away, I think the artist statement that I had there was really important. And I ended up actually also including a really small recording device, since I could be there, and I'd love to be able to talk about menstrual cups and period shaming. And so I put it there as a way for people to just kind of comment and to open this up to conversation. It was there on opening night, and I went back to get the recorder, and it was just a big party. And I was like, okay, it was not the right venue. It was an interesting idea. It was not necessarily successful, but if this were another gallery, and there were, if there were somebody there kind of encouraging people to interact. So I think you can, there are different solutions to kind of have that conversation. And honestly, I haven't put this on my website yet, because it needs this two-way. It needs the right place and time, because I don't want people to just be grossed out and not get it. I want to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, or dismissive, right? Like, which is, that would be the one I'd be. Even grossed out is like, at least an emotion. I think it would be more of a shame for people to just see it and write it off as something that they're not worth interacting with, because they feel like they can't, I don't know, get their brains around it, or they just don't want to interact. I think it's really interesting that you said, well, it was gross. No, it's not gross. Well, it was gross at first, and then, because I think that's like one of the strongest, that's like the strongest point you could make, with this, because not only did you kind of went through the stages yourself just to make it, where you were like, there's a little bit of a stigma in my brain, it kind of grosses me out, and that's not like entirely uncalled for, right? Like, blood contains pathogens, and we don't need to be like completely free with bodily fluids. That's not, I don't think, what we're advocating for here. But the whole idea that you started off feeling like a little bit icky about it, and then through exposure, you kind of destigmatized it to yourself, and then it just became a media like anything else. So like, that you in the creation went through a process, I think it really makes it more powerful.
Yeah, and actually, so, and I knew I wanted to do resin when you were talking about like the pathogens, and put layers of it, so that this is all covered. It's mixed with resin, but it also has a layer of resin, so there's no blood exposed. But then you're right, the way that I mounted it, and because this was my first time doing this, I did the cranes later because I loved how this worked, and the idea of the light shining through it, and even pouring the resin, you'll see on the edges, it's kind of this organic shape, and it to me turned it into a beautiful piece when you add light. And so
it's like when you make slides in chemistry class, or biology class rather, under the microscope. It's very reminiscent of that. That's why it's so important that it's on something clear.
So it's all, sometimes the artwork just kind of has a life of its own, and for whatever reason, you're called to make it, and then it evolves. And I have actually through this made some really interesting partnerships, and with an organization that creates in Boulder that creates sanitary pads for biodegradable sanitary pads for girls in Africa. And so, these kinds of things, that like opens up your world if you just kind of let it. And, for the people who are going to be dismissive or grossed out, fine. Not everybody has to like everything.
No, 100%. That's a given, and it's important to remind everyone of that. And because I think that's a good mantra for a lot of artists to refrain to. Not everybody has to like everything. You're not going to catch everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, we are way over time, but that's fine. That's just a symptom of a great interview. And
You
somebody
guys can cut it and edit and do whatever you do.
maybe.
This is so fun. It's so nice to like actually spend a lot of time talking about pieces.
Yeah.
Normally I'm at a show for half an hour and drinking wine and
yeah, and you get to maybe talk to somebody for a few minutes and then they float on through the crowd. No, I think this is like a really interesting deep dive. And if you're out there watching this out there in the internet, like, you can skip forward. If you're bored of us, go to the end. You're free to move the slider as you will. So I want to get on to a look to the future here, and our third and kind of final select